Hello, Isaac.
Rabbi, good morning. It's good afternoon. So good to see you.
Slowly slipping into our third month of Matthew chapter 5.
Chapter 5. Can you believe it? Matthew chapter 5.
I hear after chapter 5, it's all downhill. Okay, so we are in the antitheses. We've already spoken about anger and adultery and divorce, and we'll hopefully get to some of swearing, vows, and promises today. The thing that we never do today, it's so interesting. I never swore or had an oath to anything. It's very interesting when you think about how foreign the concept of oaths are. I was actually thinking about this the other day. In was it the Scarlet Letter? One of the ideas is that at the end of it, they say, like, if I swear and I'm lying, which they say just lie, then I've lost everything. There definitely was in rabbinic and biblical belief that your name was like a credit card. The second that your credit card was canceled or revoked or shown to be stolen one time, it kind of ruined your life. So I think, like, even before we start, it's good to get in that mindset that swears and promises were the equivalent of being on the right side of history, the right side of being able to have a financial portfolio. And the second that you got caught lying once, you're done. You lost your name, and your name was the way you got things done. The way even to make financial transactions, they would sign in the olden days with two witnesses. If one witness was shown to be lying, that kind of uproots the whole system.
Yeah. So speaking back here for earlier conversation, right? This is in the context of lying. As you said, that then people's names were the currency, or the social status was a currency. Yes. And if a person was caught lying, then they would lose value. Does the same logic also apply to envy? Right.
No.
So could you focus on this? So what is so special about this that this lying?
Like you said, it was the currency. The second you're caught be lying, that you couldn't effectuate a transaction anymore.
What is the basis for that? So could you help me understand this? Like, in what? So as you just said, envy is not the same thing as lying, but envy is as detrimental.
So even murdering, I think it's the worst. Adultery. This is the one thing. Listen, all sins are bad. First of all, envy, as we spoke about earlier, envy is a different category because the physical manifestation of envy is not so clear that if you're just envious regularly without actually acting on it, it may not be so bad. But if you lie, that is something that your name can't be held to be used for future transactions.
Do you believe it or not, everybody lies. So there's something called a white lie.
Not everyone bears false witness. There's a difference. This is our section. I mean, we're going to read in a section. We're going to read it in a second. But this section is not about just lying. It's about bearing false witnesses, which is one of the 10 Commandments, which we'll touch upon. Here, let's read it, and then we'll see. We'll just read two verses.
The Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 5, verse 33 onwards. Again, you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king.
Right, and it goes on and on. What we might touch on the middle of 34, we'll do maybe the first half of 34. But I don't know if the right word is comical, but I think it's interesting and funny that the verse starts with again. Because as we know from adultery, we already had in 5:27, it says, you have heard that it was said. And then we're gonna see in 5:38, when we talk about retaliation, it's gonna say, you have heard it was said. And in 5:43, on when loving one's enemy, it's gonna say, you have heard that it was said. And 5:21 is the only other time where it also means you have heard it in ancient times. So we actually spoke about that in passing. But I think it's very funny if you imagine a speaker. This is like maybe not the right attitude to have. But if you imagine a speaker and he's making a list of things, people a lot of times get bored. So it's almost like a tactic to make people aware. I know that I'm making a list of things. It is the least engaging way to speak about to write a sermon, to say, don't lie, don't have adultery, don't have divorce, don't retaliate, love one's neighbor. So I think it's almost comical. It says, again, you have heard. By the way, I know that I'm citing the 10 Commandments again. I know that you're aware of this stuff. So I think it's very interesting that Jesus starts with this acknowledgement that I'm still on this topic. Correct. I haven't moved on yet. That's okay. Don't worry about it. We're going to finish this topic.
Does it also highlight the centrality of the Ten Commandments, or the wisdom embodied in the Ten Commandments, right? Because anger started from there, lust is from there, envy was from there, and
Yeah,
now
but
again,
in 538 and 543, retaliation and loving one's enemies are very, very much not. Eye for an eye is very much not part of the Ten Commandments. It's part of a different section of the Bible. So the answer is yes. That you could even argue that this is not exactly from the Ten Commandments. Like definitely divorce is not from the Ten Commandments. I think we spoke about already when we spoke about before the parable of the salt and light, and we spoke of the Beatitudes. I wanted to make the argument that this were 10 new commandments. So it's almost like he sets up the 10 commandments, the new ones. He has his parables, and now he's kind of like fleshing out all the details, maybe about what does the old stuff mean now. So over here, there's a very interesting section to talk about like what it can mean here. But even before we get started here about swearing and lying, I think a little context would be helpful. A lot of times we speak about how Jesus is definitely a product of first century Judaism. But we speak about how maybe he was a bit rebellious, or maybe he's a bit of a revolutionary, or maybe he takes the teachings of first century Judaism and takes it to another level. I think this is a phenomenal example right here of another case where Jesus has already the rabbinic interpretation of the text. He uses the rabbinic interpretation, just like we saw by Beit Shammai, Beis Hillel, we got divorce. He takes one side, but he takes it one notch up. It's very easy to see over here. So first, I figured we'd start that there's a difference biblically between a promise and an oath.
What's the difference?
So in rabbinic circles, there's actually a whole tractate on promises and a whole tractate on oaths.
Okay, so in the context of what he said earlier, where a person's name is the currency, right? So could you delineate between just normal everyday conversation? How is that different from promise? And how is, again, so it's three groups. We have oath, we have promise, and then normal everyday conversations. Sasso saying, is it okay to lie in normal everyday conversations, but is lying not okay only as it pertains to oath taking and to promise making, or does lying apply to all three? And what is the distinction between these three groups?
So it's never okay to lie. So that's
but,
very.
But we lie. Everybody lies all the time. We all lie. Everyone lies.
Very adamant about that. I've noticed that. We're not lying right now. I'm not lying that I believe you're being very adamant that everyone lies. I want you to differentiate in your head. We actually are going to see, we're not going to see it today, but James specifically advocates that based on, I think, this verse, he says, don't make us swear, just say yes or no. Because there's two different levels of promises and swears. There's I swear by my Father in heaven, the seat of throne of the heavens, and the seventh level that by the seat of God, another one's like, I'm going to do that. So already in the Bible and already in Rabbinic Judaism, we differentiate between those two, namely using God's name versus not using God's name. That's
so that's called what that's called promise maker. That's called oath. That's called making oath. If one were to use the name of God to make a promise.
So I'm just telling you outside to answer your question. I didn't yet say the rabbinic difference. And even the rabbinic difference may not be the inherent difference. I'll just say the rabbinic difference is very simple. In rabbinic Judaism, you could say, I am forbidding myself from an external object. That's one way. That's swearing something off. Or you could say, I promise to do something. Let me give you, so as an example, I see that offering? That offering, I will never touch that animal. That is going to the temple. It's not mine. Another one is saying, I promise to give that animal to the temple. So one, you're kind of swearing something off, and the other one, you're promising to do something. So that's kind of like the biblical, the rabbinic difference between the two. But what's so interesting, just from the Jesus perspective, is that if Isaac, let's imagine you want to make a promise. I promise to God, let's say I'm speaking for you. I promise to God that I will give $10 a day to charity. would you say that you're a good person or a bad person? I'd say, wow, this sounds like the righteous Isaac living up to his namesake.
Sounds like a rich person. If I can give $10 a day to charity, that's rich. I mean, it means that I have means.
Okay,
That I have access. Well, $10 a day, that's $300 a month, so it means that I probably have access to some form of means, that I have
right,
access to some
like putting
form
aside
of
the money.
yeah.
I don't mean to evaluate how much money you have. I'm just saying, if you promise $1 a day, but if you make a commitment, a promise to God or to the universe, whatever, that you're going to go give and give back to the universe, either charity or something else, everyone would consider that righteous. So it's really interesting. In Rabbinic Judaism, they did not. And let me explain. I'm going to read you the line from the Mishnah. This line is actually from the first Mishnah of Tractate Promises, Tractate Nadarim. And what it says is, in short, it starts with the language that you use. How does one make a promise? So I'm just going to skip over the language of how to make a promise. And it says that if someone says, I promise to do something like the promises of evil people. You hear this? If I promise to do something, the promise of evil people, then that promise is binding upon you. And this is so interesting because it's the opposite of what you would think today. If I said, Isaac, you are an evil person, you're a sinner, and you're a liar and a thief, and you make a promise, what do I know about you? You're not going to keep your promise. And what the rabbis teach in this first Mishnah is the exact opposite. If you say, I take upon myself to give $1 a day, like the way that someone who is evil to make a promise, then you have to keep that promise. Why? You ready for this? You're gonna love this. The reason is very simple. Only evil people make promises. The belief in Rabbinic Judaism is that a good person doesn't need a promise to bind him in order.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. This was my earlier question. Yeah, okay.
The next line of this Mishnah, still the first Mishnah. This is how important. First Mishnah. If someone says, I make a promise that like the promise of the righteous people, but tzaddik, of a kosher, the word it uses actually in Mishnah is kosher. I make a promise like a kosher person, like a person, I assume a kosher person means a person who never lies or adamantly never lies. Mm-hmm. So if you make a promise like that, I'm going to bring an offering, or I'm going to bring a Nazarite, or even that I will not eat a loaf of bread, that promise, you say, I make a promise like the way that a kosher person or the way that a tzaddik, a righteous person will make a promise, doesn't count, because righteous people don't make promises. So when you said that, you're really saying, I am not making a promise. It's almost like crossing your fingers, or it's almost like putting in parenthesis, so you're saying, I'm not really making that promise. So the first thing I think we need to do to understand Jesus' perspective is say, in first century Judaism, only evil people make promises. Isn't that so cool? So
yeah. And doesn't that truth apply even to today's day and age? Like, why would a person make a promise? Can one not just I mean, my point is
the Talmud answers that. The Talmud actually gives 4 reasons someone would make a promise, and some of them are funny. One is like they have a case also in this tractate where these 2 people are negotiating, and one guy says, "I will not pay a penny more than $1 for that stack of grapes." And the guy and the merchant say, I will not drop a penny less than $5. And they both promise. We assume that promise is fake, and it's just a negotiating tactic. So that was like, you make a promise because you know it's fake. That's one side. Another side, though, you make a promise because you want to encourage yourself to be a better person. I promise that every day I'm going to wake up to pray the morning prayers as early as possible. So it could be a point of alacrity that it pushes you to be a better person. And the rabbis accept that. You might want to make a promise, and that might be a good reason to make a promise.
So do you make a distinction between, okay,
we haven't gone to oaths yet. We're making promises.
Do the rabbis make a distinction between a promise made to oneself and a promise made to somebody else, right? So if I made a promise to myself as a means to improve myself, isn't that a bit different? That's just more, again, there's no consequences. It's just me thinking of things in my own head.
A promise has a legal status. So if you're saying, I want to go practice, I want to jog every day for half an hour, my New Year's resolution, that wouldn't be a promise. A promise has a set formulation rabbinically, because rabbis are all about legalisms. And unless you use that set formulation, it doesn't count. And I think that's what James is saying when he says, say yes or no. He's saying, make sure, if you want to be part of this whole ideology of making promises, to not fall into the legalism of making a real promise. Because the second you fall into legalism and making a real promise of the way the rabbis formulate it, then you're not following what Jesus said anymore. It's also easy, just on a side note, this is not the focus on this. It's really interesting when you see how James, or like the first century, the first generation of apostles, are actually interpreting the New Testament. So I've been making the argument throughout the Sermon on the Mount that this stuff is not really meant literally. It's meant to be super arrogative. It's meant to teach you that Christians are meant to go beyond the letter of the law. And if anything, you're supposed to understand these antitheses as parables.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you don't get, for example, let's use this one as an example. In Matthew, it says, don't ever swear. Jesus, forget Jesus, God swears in the Bible. Abraham swears, Abraham tells Eliezer, swear in the Bible. Throughout the Bible, we see swearing, and you could say, it's very nice to say, oh, we don't do that anymore. But so
so his promise is swearing, are they all the same thing, or are they different?
So to answer that question, that's like the next point. So, okay, we're gonna go back to the idea of like just to compartmentalize to bookend what we're saying. So the first idea we're concluding with is that Jesus was coming out of the rabbinic historical context of a negative attitude towards promises. Okay, so that's our first point. Okay, so if you want to know about the idea of oaths now, shvuot, we should look at the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments are in the Bible twice, once in Exodus, once in Deuteronomy. So just, you could choose either one because it doesn't inherently matter. So when we look at Exodus 20, verse is, was it 7? So I'm going to translate it for you, but I'm going to point out some of the nuances for the Hebrew that may not come up because there's no good translation for a lot of these things. Okay, so the Hebrew says, Lo tisah Shem Hashem Elokecha lashav. So it says, Lo tisah. So in English, my English says, you shall not take the name of Hashem. So tisah means raise up. So people are just, you got to do what you want. It means don't raise up God's name. So, that can mean don't take names. It can mean don't lie. It's unclear what it means don't raise up God's name. But then it says lashav, for vain, for nothingness. So some people will say, take God's name when it's not in vain. Don't take God's name when it is in vain. So for example, you can say, I swear to God, God in heaven, and use God's name. Maybe use the tetragrammaton, the Jehovah name, and you say, I swear to God that I'm going to do something. It could be this verse of 27 in Exodus is okay with that. And not only that, we see certain times that Rabbinic Judaism understands you have to swear of God's name in order to make sure that it's taken seriously. Otherwise, it doesn't count as a swear. So what we see over here, and again, there's different traditions, but I'm speaking generally, that it looks like when you read 20-7, it's saying, take God's name, but don't take it in vain. Because if you take it in vain, that's one of the 10 Commandments that's horrible. But if you want to say, take God's name to say, I swear to God, I will avenge the king's death or whatever, that might be a holy action. So what's interesting is Rabbinic Judaism struggles with this. Well, lashav means for nothingness. For example, Rashi, a very famous 12th century, 11th century commentator, he says, what does for vain mean? For no reason, for foolishness. So he actually understands it to mean, it's not that for lying, that's how I understood it. He means like, don't swear. I swear to God with God's name, I'm going to drink water today. We all know you're going to drink water. You're not fasting. Don't swear in a way that's meaningless. And I think this is what we have to deal with when we understand what Jesus is prescribing, or in this case, proscribing here. We have to try to understand how he's interpreting this verse in Exodus and the verse in Deuteronomy. So I'm showing you two ways to read this. So when you look back at our verse in Matthew 5:33, you shall not swear falsely. So he says very, very clearly, that is not how Rashi learns it. Rashi understands it that you should not take it in vain. And it could be, though, a fortiori argument. Not only can you not lie, but you can't even do it for no reason. So it could be included in Rashi's interpretation is Jesus' interpretation. It may be like, it's so obvious. You mean you can't do it for no reason? Why would anyone swear in God's name for no reason?
So in 533, he's saying that you can swear, but just don't swear falsely, as in don't make a false promise in the name of God. But if you use God's name,
you can't say in 533 because 534 exists. 533 I understand as putting in the historical context of Rabbinic Judaism and putting into the context of biblical interpretation. One of the reasons that 533 starts, you heard in ancient times, I understood that as a reference to the 10 Commandments. And he wants us to go look up Exodus 20-7. And he wants to see this, and then he's telling us what he means. When it says lashav, that you should not take God's name in vain, where Rashi understands it for no reason or for foolishness, Jesus understands it to mean falsely. But then Jesus, the way I've been understanding the antitheses and the Sermon on the Mount in general is that each one of these is meant to be super ergative. It's meant to go beyond the letter of the law. So first he tells you, you have heard, don't swear falsely. So, and then he's interpreting the verse in 20-7. But then he says, let's just finish that verse, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. That's saying, like you said, 100% swear, but when you swear, when you make a promise, make sure to carry it out, because otherwise you're a horrible person breaking the 10 commandments. Just like this is very, very much parallel to 5:27 on adultery and 5:20 and the one on murder. Where's that? Wherever the one on murder is. So because both those saying don't do adultery, but I'm saying even don't feel this. Don't be angry, but don't murder, but even don't be angry. So so what those two are, I think, a different personality traits. They're saying don't murder, don't be angry. It's saying murder and anger is very similar thing. But over here, it's really the same context. It's saying not only should you not swear falsely, which is like obvious. It's so funny. He's saying like the 10 commandments are obvious. You don't even need to teach them, because now I'm teaching my new religion is going, or my building upon Judaism is going to the next stage. Okay. And then so let's only read half of 34 because I don't want to go through the whole 34. But I say to you, do not swear at all. And then goes in the different ways to swear, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God. Okay, we'll stop there. What he's saying now, very clearly, he's saying that when it says, do not swear, do not take God's name in vain, he's saying, no, that actually means don't lie. But on top of that is an additional commandment. He's taking the rabbinic interpretation of saying don't take God's name. But then, as we said, he's actually going one level past the rabbis, because the rabbis say you should never, anyone who ever makes a neder, a promise, is doing something evil, but they do still have the idea of oaths. It could be in certain situations the rabbis mandated to take an oath. And let me give you a couple examples. If someone is trying to collect money from a orphan's estate, okay? Orphans are very vulnerable. So, if, for example, the ex-wife is trying to collect money from there, they'd say they mandate that you have to make an oath with God's name. Let me give you another example. If a situation where you're trying to say that we both own part of this, and I agree, like we both own this car. I own part of the car. I say I own part and you own part. If you want to say we have to sell the car and split it, they mandate that you take an oath. In any situation where you have a psychological proclivity to stealing, to trying to rob the other person, the rabbis mandated rabbinically that you have to take an oath. So in other words, they understood the 10 commandments saying don't take it falsely, and they also took Rashi into consideration. Don't do it for no reason. So if it's not lying, and if it's not for no reason, they say 100% take oaths, because oaths are ways to hold people accountable. And I think this is now the question. Now, like I feel like I haven't asked you a question yet, Isaac. Why is Jesus anti-oaths? Why is Jesus anti-taking?
Yeah, this goes back to the question we began with, right? So why even have a category called oath, right? Cannot, like, is it so by oath, right, does it make a distinction between normal conversational language and then oath and the language which has oath in it? Isn't it?
The rabbis make that distinction, but James doesn't, it seems.
Doesn't. And I would say now, like, isn't a normal conversations good enough? Like, do I have to, if I said, Rabbi, I'll be there tomorrow, isn't that good enough? Do I have to make an oath to say that I will do something or do this, when if I just say, I'll be there tomorrow, why is that, isn't that good enough? And then but I'm still stuck on people telling lies, because we all tell lies all the time. There's category called white lies, where it's kind of not completely false truth, but it's kind of partly true.
I think the only reason you're so focused on that is because you're not internalizing the strength of what Jesus is saying here. Because what Jesus is saying is that you're not allowed to take oaths anymore. It's not only about lying. It's that this category of human thought, this category of psychological not manipulation, coercion that the rabbis were so worried about, is out of limits for you. So Jesus is not. This is not about lying. That's a good way to say it. This has nothing to do about lying. This has to do about the way that you speak when you're referencing God. Because look what Jesus focuses on. Even though I don't want to read it today too much, but you not swear at all by heaven. For the throne of God. If that verse stopped and we don't have 5:35, you and I would have been completely fine. Look at 535, which we'll talk about next time.
Yeah.
It says a whole list of ways that he doesn't want you to swear. So in other words, Jesus was very, very worried about not necessarily the swear, but the connection that the swear had to God. So now,
Okay. So let me put it this way.
why
So
is Jesus anti-swearing?
I don't know. So is it okay? Is it okay if one made an oath but not connect that to God? Is it even possible? Like in this
So
context, right?
I can't answer that question because it seems, according to James, no, it's not okay. He says yes, only say yes or no. But we don't know. I could tell you the rabbinic definition of swearing and the rabbinic definition of promises, but it could be Jesus had a little bit different definition. So we can't tell you for sure. We can tell you the way that the apostles interpreted it, Jesus, is that no swearing at all.
Mhm.
Okay, so let me give you like maybe my understanding of it, and it definitely my starting point is very simple. This has to be super ergative. It has to be go beyond the letter of the law, and it has to be something that it kind of makes Christians stand out as not really being part and parcel of the Jewish people in the way that everyone else would be. So what I think Jesus is saying here is that while you rabbinic Jews say you have an obligation to say an oath sometimes, we never can be so have so much hubris maybe, or have this attitude that we could ever use God's name. God's name is this ethereal object, much like the throne of God, much like the footstool of God. It's this object that is not within the human arsenal to wield.
So it sounds like Jesus is not opposed to oath taking. It's just that because oath taking is so connected to the name of God, and the name of God is so high, blessed be the name of God. He wanted to remove the connection between oath taking and the name of God. Right? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I feel like we can't divorce it. So yes, but I feel like we can't divorce 534 from 536, where he says, "And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair." It makes it sound like the whole idea of this oath is that Christians, the idea of oath taking of God's name is that God has this objective reality that God lives in. And God is controlling history and does what he wants. And the second that you make an oath, you're almost making a prophetic assumption about you're going to be able to carry out something in the future. You don't have the power as a Christian to move one hair white or black.
That's true. That is very true.
Without. So I think it's like this dual piece that Christians have this obligation not to swear because they can't control God's name.
So in a way, right, what this is referring to is just that God is an ontologically different being. He's saying that because it's a being who's outside of one's imagination, outside of one's grasp. Do not swear at all. Do not make an oath by his name. And even if one were to make an oath with your own name, just be aware that that we are finite beings. And as he says, I can't make one hair white or black. So don't make an oath at all. Is this just a reference of how fickle human beings are, or a lack of control, or it's just a reflection of how so much of life is just by chance, as in it's not as in
I don't think Jesus sees it by chance, and I don't think it's about humans being fickle. It's about having the whole Sermon on the Mount. The idea is having the right attitude to your relationship with God, right? Saying
which is also a recognition of where one stands, right? To have that attitude to God, I should first know where I stand, to know that this is where God, to know that the holy other is over there. Is that, I mean, by definition, wouldn't this be defined by definition of saying, this is God? If this is God, then I first have to know who I am before one can at least know who God is.
Yes, I don't disagree. The underlying idea, though, that I just keep saying, this has nothing to do about lying. That's the point. Just like murder had nothing to do with murder. Mm-hmm. No one was going around murdering. I hope no one's going around adultering, if that's a verb. No one's going around cheating. Everyone always knew those were wrong. But this is about having a different attitude towards the early things, such that using these things as parables themselves. You should understand that a promise entails, an oath entails a control of the future and a control of God's name. And that is not what a Christian has. A Christian surrenders God's name and surrenders the future to the will of God.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
Yes, I
that's
think
what I think.
that's
Okay. And that's why, like, I'm not going to make a big deal when we talk about next time heaven or footstool or Jerusalem, but I think he wanted you to have a list of like, here's the way that everyone's swearing now, and there's different levels of like maybe control, and just any level of you think you control is not good.
so Rabbi, if I said I'll meet you tomorrow, I'll meet you tomorrow. So in a sense, I'm making a claim about, I'm making giving you my word about tomorrow, that tomorrow I'll meet with you. So isn't that not a form of, so you're saying that that is
No, Jesus
okay?
against that. So if anything, you should ask. I feel bad because we keep going on, but when it says in 537, let your word be yes, yes, or no, no, I think the question is, why is Jesus okay with that? And the simple answer to that is that, you still got to function as a human. Jesus he never takes you to the angelic level. He always takes you one level below. He still allows you to exist as a human, but a really tough lifestyle as a human. No anger, no this. He wants you to have goggles that he has. He goes like, even when you look at the Beatitudes, which I wanted to argue that the Beatitudes were completely unfulfillable from a human perspective.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That being said, the poor in spirit could still be blessed. And those who mourn for they are comforted, they could be blessed. You could still have the attitude. It's just almost impossible. So Jesus I think he always goes to an angel is 100%, and a Christian is supposed to be like this 99%, which is completely unattainable. But that's what you're striving for. Do you think Jews are striving for the 99%? Jews are striving for the 70%. We're saying that like, oh, you're over here. It's your job in life to be a better person than you were. I think like we view like as a Jew, we view like we have a certain potential, and if you're mentally challenged, you go this far. If you're really strong, Samson could go this far. If you're really smart, you go this far. But everyone has their inabilities that they can't overcome, and Jesus is like, I don't care about inabilities. If you can't see, you can't walk, I'll heal you. Food, I'll get you food. You're too meek, that's even better. All those things, he's living at this a reality, in my opinion, that is completely unachievable. And he's trying to, again, these are, if anything, if you think of motivational speakers, there's two attitudes towards motivational speakers. There's the one attitude that says, every day you wake up, you focus every minute, you be a different person. You have to go, and just like that's a rock, you have to be a rock. It's a change. And then the other one says like, know where you are now and just get over that hump. Get to the next piece. Just try to chip away at those personality flaws. And those are two models. And I think Jesus takes the motivational speaker of like just get to the mountain and hang out on the mountain as you and the Jews just try to get up the mountain. So I think that's like the difference that we're going to keep seeing on the Sermon on the Mount.
Interesting. I
Okay.
didn't think of it, but I see what he's saying, right? He does take it a level above the commandments, and some of this honestly is not attainable. It is very difficult. It is very difficult to attain every single one of them.
It's not only that. A lot of times, don't forget the leader who speaks of the most right-wing or left-wing leader, speaking of him as this super arrogant leader, is always hated, always mocked. Always, it's a consequence of this attitude that the normal people won't be able to handle it. They'll be like, this is beyond our reach. This is junk. And if anything, where do we see this the most? In the Catholic Church, right? In the Catholic Church, we say we have these fathers, these priests, who are meant to live at this super arrogant level. And then they have the rest of the people, which are saying like, oh, you guys can't handle this level. It's almost this recognition that Jesus is speaking to two different kind of people. Okay.
Okay, lots to think on that. Maybe this will be a good place to pause for the day.